Hotep, I'm Dr. Gloria Lattimore Peace, host and producer of OmniU Presents the H3O Art of Life show. And the title of this show, I should have conferred with my guests, but I go ahead and name my shows anyway, and then the guests just fall in line with the subject matter. But I always know the guests, so I know that the subject matter is appropriate. I'm calling this show African Consciousness, True or False, because I have a psychologist on the show, and I know that Dr. Kobi Kambon can talk to us about psychology and about consciousness. So I know that I'm not out in deep water by myself. I'm out here with life jacket on, holding hands with somebody who can handle the subject matter. And then I have Robert T. Starks, who is Professor Emeritus from Northeastern Illinois University, who had been my colleague for many, many years before he decided to retire. But I understand that he still holds an office in the building, and so
a little small one,
a small office. So you know, these people. Dr. Kambon is allegedly retired from Florida A&M, but I think this probably not true, because I've seen some videos with you speaking all about the place. So I think probably that retirement must need redefining, because you are two gentlemen who are very active still. And I'm very happy to greet you, and I'm going to let Robert, who is part of the community who is presenting you, to give us some of your background, because I have questions. I came armed, and I have questions that I want to ask you. So I want him to tell us who you are, and then I'll ask my questions.
Well, Dr. Kobi Kambon, a.k.a. Joseph Baldwin, is, of course, came to Chicago back in the early 60s, is that correct?
61. And
was a part of the community with us, worked part-time at the Center for Inner City Studies, worked with Bobby Wright and others. And he, of course, went off to Florida A&M and stayed there for all this time, and mentored a whole group of young people who have come along in his stead, and have made quite a representation for himself. And he, of course, is being presented by the community on the 26th, that is Saturday the 26th, at Center for Inner City Studies, 700 East Oakwood Boulevard. And we're asking that you come out. It's 700 East Oakwood Boulevard. It's at 11 o'clock, and he'll make a presentation on his book, which is quite a very, very good book on the whole issue of African American psychology.
Well, now I can ask my questions? Okay, so what I want to do is I want to pose a lot of questions at the same time. And then I want to let you just deal with them in whatever order you think they belong, and then if you forget any, I'll bring it back up. Is that fair? Okay. All right. You have said the key to African people's problems is psychological in nature. So I'm going to want you to elaborate on that, if you will. You have said that you have talked about, and I'm not going to name it, but you have talked about what you call the most critical experience in African diasporan history. The most critical experience. I want you to talk about that. You also have said information is the foundation for armament. See, I like those things. I'm really fond of those. And I think I'll let those three go, and then I'll let you just do whatever you like with those. And then if you miss any stuff I want you to repeat, then I'll tell you, and we'll go back in.
Okay.
Okay.
You can hold me to it. I may forget, but bring me back on pace. First of all, it's a pleasure to be back in Chicago. Chicago is my second home, and so I'm delighted to be back and to be on the show and to be able to give back to Chicago, because Chicago gave me so much when I was a young developing intellectual. Uh, in terms of my work, what was the first question again?
The key to African people's problems is psychological in nature.
Yes. In 1983, while I served as the national president of the Association of Black Psychologists, our guest speaker for our convention that year in D.C. was the eminent late Dr. Chancellor Williams. And so I had the great honor of sharing the podium with him and discoursing with him, and it was just a special experience and honor for me. At that convention, we had invited him to speak, and he had not been taking a lot of requests for speaking because he had glaucoma and some other medical challenges at that time in his life, and he was very selective about what he accepted. But he told us from the podium that once he got the invitation from the Association of Black Psychologists, he was compelled to get off of his sick bed and to come and give us our charge. Because he said of all of his studying of the history of African people, it was clear to him that one of the key issues came down to the psychology of African people and how that psychology was being oppressed or misused or redefined by the enemies of African people. So I'm just really echoing one of the great sages of our people and certainly of our history when I say that when you look at the conditions of our people, that we behave in a way that is not affirming, not racially or culturally affirming. As a matter of fact, we behave in ways that are anti-African, that are anti-black. And so clearly there's something wrong with the psychological orientation of black people or African descent people under this condition of oppression. And so if we're going to mount a liberation struggle, if we're going to transform our condition to one of empowerment from disempowerment, then it's clear that we're going to need some understanding of the psychological dynamics of what is happening to African people so that we can gain control over those forces and utilize them in a way that affirms our people. So I'm blessed to have been chosen by the ancestors to be a student of psychology, and it's exciting to try to create paradigms that will serve the liberation of our people in the discipline of psychology. So I think it's clear that when a group of people, a race of people, behave in a way that is not affirming, that is not empowering, then surely we have to begin. Something is wrong with their mind. Something is wrong mentally. Something is wrong in the psychological orientation of those people.
Well, you mentioned Chancellor Williams, and I noticed that you hung out with the right people because you had also mentioned in one of your presentations Bobby E. Wright.
Absolutely.
And Bobby E. Wright came up with a very classic term called menticide, in which he said, well, of course, you and I and many of us understand that the battle is for the African mind, that everybody wants the African mind, apparently, but the African himself, who is not seemingly unaware that his mind is being stolen. So we have had every single African-centered scholar, such as yourself, go to that at some point, no matter what they're writing about. At some point they go in and they try to give it a name. John Henry Clark called it cultural disruption, but he was still talking about psychology. Bobby Wright, menticide. So everybody, Kiara Cheatwood called it self-hatred. Everybody has had to address that, couldn't tell our story without visiting the problems, the psychological problems that we have.
In my work, I've adopted this construct I call cultural misorientation as a way to operationalize what I think is taking place with our people in terms of our psychological orientation. And it simply addresses the fact that African people have a cultural orientation, but it's incorrect. We have a cultural orientation because the institutions of this society foster it, the orientation that we operate according to. That orientation is destroying black people. But
attributes of that orientation, please.
I call it the European worldview that we have internalized as our natural and normal worldview. Because the infrastructure of the society reinforces it. So we're reinforced for acting and thinking and feeling like we're Caucasians. because the institutions, again, endorse that for black people. And I think that, but what happens is, so we're really in a conflict as to what do we do to affirm ourselves, because we have a basic natural need to do so. But the only tools that we have consciously are the tools that have been really generated on us by our oppression. And so those tools will never respond to that question. They will only get us deeper in the mire of our oppression.
When you talk about psychology being a road to the liberation of African people, you're not talking about the psychology of Freud and
Absolutely
Jung.
not.
Okay.
Absolutely not.
Talking
about the psychology of Wright and Kambon and others.
Gotcha. Right.
One of the things that you said, one of the examples that you gave that I think is just so powerful, is that you said that some of us spend 10 hours in the morning getting ready to go out. 10 hours transforming ourselves into something, well, you didn't call it un-African, but I would choose to use that. Something as un- and non-African as possible in order to go out to meet the world. We see now that we prefer everything artificial to the things that are naturally ours. We prefer other people's hair, other people's nails, other people's skin color, other people's body physique. We just seem to disown our natural selves. We don't honor it, we don't affirm it. And this is part of what you're talking about when self-affirming our behavior is. And we don't recognize it as that.
That's what makes it so dangerous, so lethal. The subtitle of one of my books, I call it Cultural Misorientation, the Greatest Threat to the Survival of the Black Race in the 21st Century. And the reason why it's such a potent force is because it goes unrecognized as disorder. We see it as normal, even though it's not providing us with the satisfaction of empowerment and affirmation. But we see it as that's the only reality that we know, that we're cognizant of. And so we see it as normal to get up early, to spend all that time to transform ourselves, because it undermines our self-confidence as black people. It undermines our self-esteem as black people. You see, it undermines all those things. So we have to do this transformation every day before we get out, trying to make ourselves as presentable to the European worldview as it requires of us, so that we can feel comfortable as we navigate through life, you know, and feeling good about ourselves.
And we're making Europeans feel more superior than they already do.
Oh, well.
Because if we're emulating them, you know, the first time I saw someone with a contact lens of a different eye color, I was so startled because I thought, why? You know, what is the purpose and what is the need to change your eye color?
Cultural misorientation means that we, black people, perpetuate white supremacy domination in the black community. We perpetuate it. You see, it becomes a
And if they stop tomorrow, it would still continue because we are perpetuating it. Well, if they tomorrow decided that they didn't want to be racist anymore and they just wanted to be natural people like you know, human beings are, we would still continue. I think you're right too.
Unless there would be institutional forces designed to re-Africanize us, or to transform us into the African-centered beings that we naturally should be, then certainly we will continue.
That's scary.
I mean, in terms of behavior, the institutions around us foster behavior. They represent the stimulus field that controls behavior, that defines behavior. And so if we don't change the institution infrastructure around us and transform it to an African-centered infrastructure, then
but where's the
to
impetus going to come from to make us want to change the institutions if we don't want to change ourselves?
Well, and
if you want to be, if you want to continue to be this pseudo European, you know, with all the attributes of Europeanness that you can manage, then why would this personality seek to put itself in an environment that's anti this personality? I can't see that would.
Well, I think that Well, something I'll be talking about tomorrow when we talk about what I call preventive interventions or creating African-centered preventive interventions for cause misorientation is that we have to have information is powerful. Information controls, what we do and what we think.
Right.
And so if we African people behave in a way that's anti-African because that's the information that the institutions bring to us. And so we have to change the information. We have to change the content of the information. And so once we change that to an affirming, and we have to bombard our people with it on all levels, all institutional levels, with African-centered information. That what I'm trying to do in the Cultural Misorientation book is to confront us with this contorted image of an African. Do we look in the mirror? I want us to look in the mirror and see, do we like what we see? Because the institutions of American society don't show us that picture. See, they show us this picture that says it is consistent with, it's congruent with what we should be. Even if we're disappointed, if we're frustrated, then it's because there's a deficiency inside of us. And we need to work hard, maybe get up 2 hours earlier than the 2 hours we're already getting up at. And maybe we can do a little more, we need to do more work on ourselves to transform ourselves.
And we've been taught to believe that in order to get over, to be successful in society, we have to be Europeanized. And that Africanness is negative and non-rewarding in this society.
And
look at the fights.
Punishable.
Exactly.
It's not just unrewarding.
It's
there's penalties.
And another part of my work is certainly to follow up on Bobby Wright's work on the psychopathic race of personality, Francis Welsing's work on white supremacy, this genetic survival motivation that they operated on. I think that is to confront our people with that knowledge base. This is what Caucasian psychology is. This is what it consists of. It's not this rosy picture, this distorted picture, this delusional picture that you're being painted by the institutions of society. This is that's why we have to go back and study our history and their history as psychologists, so that we can then construct the paradigm, the picture of the psychology that we're really confronted with, because we are miseducated and brainwashed to be so naive about the psychology of Caucasianism. I mean, black people who can't even control their own homes or their own neighborhood are thinking they can transform white supremacy. You see, and we can't even transform ourselves. You see, we can't. And so I think that it's very critical that we be confronted with this contorted image, this psychological oppression. That we have articulated before us what are the processes in this cycle. How do they do it to us? Many of us know they brainwash, but we don't see the processes. How do they do it? And then what are our alternatives? What is our cultural alternative? That's why we study our ancient history, and right up to the present, so we can find out what are we supposed to be like then. If we're not supposed to be like this, this doesn't lead us to the kind of human satisfaction that we desire. Then what is the African alternative? And so we have to do these things simultaneously as a part of this, what I call preventive, African-centered preventive intervention to address causal misorientation, menticide, etc.
Can we try simultaneously? I'll just invent me a new word, because you're talking about the institutions, managing the institutions, controlling their impact on us. But then I'm looking at the closest people to our young people are people in their homes and in their neighborhoods.
Absolutely.
And it would seem to me that if Auntie and Mama weren't wearing false hair and false
Blue
a lot of
eyes.
other things, that maybe the young people wouldn't maybe aspire to those standards, so that there's got to be some work going on in the family and in the community, some images that are admirable images, that are attractive images, that we present ourselves, and not, because we may be a while manipulating in a whole institution, but we ought to be able to get some stuff going on, in our families. I remember when the miniskirt came out, I thought that was a nice, cute fashion. I went out and bought one. My husband wouldn't let me wear it. Well, somebody had some sense. He just knew that his wife was not supposed to be marching around, with half of her body exposed to the world. But most people didn't make judgments like that.
Yeah.
So somebody, you know, father has to say to the daughter, mother has to say to the daughter, you know, parents have to say to children, husbands have to say to wives, wives have to say to husbands, some things that may be not complimentary. They, you know, but if we, as long as we are congratulating and praising people for disfiguring themselves in order to seek a persona that not only is not better in any sense, is not more attractive, not better looking, and in fact, some of the things that people have to do in order to achieve the appearance are actually detrimental. I mean, some of the chemicals that, there's a whole book about the chemicals that women use on their hair, that it causes all kinds of havoc in the physical body. So that, you know, we got to reach some people that we know, you know, not some folks running some institution somewhere, even though those are people, they that can be left unaddressed because that's where the people we know got a lot of what it is that they do.
Well, alluding back to Dr. Williams' charge to the Association of Black Psychologists, we have to have training programs for psychologists to create African-centered psychologists who are able to go out and change the mental health policy in the black community.
Okay.
You see, to create new standards about mental health, what mental health should consist of black people. Then you have some guidelines you see that you can apply to families, that human services agencies now are in a position to apply these guidelines to families, to re-educate, re-socialize our families to an African-centered,
Bobby,
you know, culture reality. And so
I forgot about you. You are a descendant of Bobby Wright.
Yeah, absolutely.
And you working on that social theory thing.
But it's so critical.
Me.
It's in terms of how we define the environment around our people. And so, but we got to have psychologists. We've got to have trained more African-centered psychologists to change the social policy for mental health and quality of life in the black community. And I think then our parents have resources to draw upon to do that. But you're absolutely right. That if we have culturally misoriented parents, then all they can generate are culturally misoriented children. And so there's, I mean, there's no way we can you know, peel that apple any other way. Yet, and so what we have to do then, how do we introduce new information, African-centered information, into our community? One way is through an African-centered mental health agenda. You know, but also through education. You know, what we call independent black schools.
Is there any hope for our our basic institution, the church?
I see that as a part. The church is a culturally misoriented. I see that as a part of the problem and perpetuating the problem. So I don't see, from my studying of the condition of our people,
I
think
that's where
that
you find you will find more of our people in a church building than you will in a university.
More women, not necessarily men.
Well, you may have to target
anywhere. They're not in the university and they're not in the church either.
Well, you may have to target it, but I'm saying the answer is not going to come through that institution. That's an institution that was really generated by cultural oppression. I mean, we adopted the religious systems that we operate under now on the plantation en masse. I mean, that's so, and I contend that African people just sit back quietly and think, as the other guests were talking about meditation, think quietly, we'll see that there's nothing that Caucasian cultural reality has given to black people has been beneficial to black people. They gave it to us, freely, then it wasn't beneficial. There was no intent to be beneficial. And so it participates in our oppression. So I think that the whole idea of this idea of what I call a interacting creator, intervening creator. That means we sit back and wait, and some other force, some spiritual force is going to come and save us, or whatever. So we don't use this frontal lobe gift that the creative force gave us to transform our world and to create the world that we want. And so I'm saying those things, they immobilize us. Those systems, those religious systems, they seem to have so far. And so I don't see that as the answer.
I didn't see it as
You
an
know,
answer,
I mean, the
but I just thought
HBCUs are
maybe,
there. You know, I mean,
okay.
they're there too. If you're talking about existing institutions, they're there too.
Okay.
But they're trying to duplicate whatever they
Absolutely.
imagine Harvard is doing and Stanford is doing. They're not
Okay.
trying to create new ideas and create new ideas about what education means and should mean for African people. So I think that existing institutions are obviously a part of the process of cultural misorientation.
Okay.
Because they wouldn't, the white supremacist system wouldn't allow them to exist if they were not
Right, because they
contributing
maintain
to
the status
quo. Absolutely.
Right.
You know.
What he just said was what your buddy always says. Jesse always says, nobody's going to save us but us.
Absolutely.
That's absolutely true.
Absolutely.
You know, and I think we have to realize that. And we
Bobby
have to-
said it before Jesse said it.
Exactly, exactly. And we have to start with our children. Our children are being bombarded with technological garbage, the television, the games, the video games, the whole bit, which again is designed to keep us in a certain mode as opposed to allowing us to burst out of that mode. Many of our children watch television 8-10 hours a day, and that's insane because there's nothing on the television that reinforces the African centeredness that we're talking about.
Yeah.
Am I right?
Mm-hmm. And again, the cultural misorientation construct is raised the issue of who defines black reality. Do black people define it in their own interests, in their own image and interests, or toward their own affirmation, or is it defined by this external anti-black energy, anti-African force called racial cultural oppression? And so it raised the issue that we have to control, we have to define our own reality, we have to control our own reality. And so it charges us to, if we're going to have an institution in our community, then it must become under the control of what Bobby called the black social theory and what I call African cultural reality. It must come under that control. Otherwise, it is not an African-centered institution. It will not lead to the affirmation and empowerment of our people. So it's a battle. It's a war. It's a Baba Jake used to call it the Civil War. He said, first of all, we got to have a civil war before we can have the war. You know, so we have to root out, you know, the Eurocentrism, or I call it Caucasianism, inside of us, so that we can begin to assert what is naturally in us, what is it's suppressing, you know, and so we need African-centered information to begin to call forth that. Absolutely, to call forth that which is natural to us. And
you can't go into battle without arms.
That's right. So we gotta control institutions. There's no way around it.
There's no way around it.
You know, but we may have to do it incrementally, begin it, but certainly we must do it. And we need these psychologists on board. Now we're still, we're still waging war inside. We got the Civil War going on inside. Bobby was leading it when he was alive inside the ABPSI, or the Association of Black Psychologists. And so that war is still continuing. We're fighting for the minds of the psychologists so they can then go out and lead this psychological liberation movement.
Lord have mercy.
Well,
okay.
that's a reality in every profession. Amongst political scientists, we have this distorted notion of reality.
I know it. Educators
Sociologists, education.
Educators are supremely guilty of this.
Exactly.
You know.
Exactly.
And they are well-intentioned, and that's the saddest part. Is
they are
because
well-intentioned,
they really think that they're
misguided.
doing good. They're missionaries. You know, they've been sent out into the colonies to civilize savages.
Another critical issue that the construct of cultural misorientation raises is the fact that it challenges us to recognize and distinguish between the European cultural reality and the African cultural reality, so that we can differentiate what we have become from what we ought to be. And so if we don't have what I call the worldview's paradigm, a paradigm that highlights this distinction, then we will continue to operate within the framework of the European worldview without knowing it. And so we won't make any attempt to alter that orientation in our people. And so I think that again, this construct is broadly applicable, as you can see, because it raised the issue that if we're internalizing the wrong cultural reality, then it implies, by implication, there is a right or correct cultural reality out there, and we have to discover it. And, you know, and
so the assumption has to be there.
Yes.
The assumption, and the hardest part for us is the assumption. First of all, you got to assume that there's something amiss.
Right.
Something is not right about
Well, we got to
this.
explain this hypertension and these migraine headaches and all these things that that the European worldview tries to explain to us and give them acceptability. But we have to see that everybody else don't suffer those things. Other people, non-blacks, don't suffer those things. So it's obviously something about the reality that we're operating in that is not affirming, and it's changing our own biochemistry, and killing our people. And
now that's just, you need to say that twice, because unless people can be persuaded that this is harmful.
Absolutely.
Because you will hear people say things like, what difference does it make? It's on my head. What difference does it make?
Yeah.
So it's not going to make a great deal of difference, and they don't see things in increments. They don't see how you keep piling this on. You first you do this little thing, then you do this next little thing, and then you keep on until you have done so much you have submerged what was there in the first place, so that it can't even be identified. You can't even find the you that you started with when you keep adding all these things. I don't want to leave this, but I do have to a minute, because I have to let you talk about the most critical experience in African diaspora and history, which you of course are talking about what people call, quote, quote, the slave trade.
Enslavement. The enslavement. Yes, experience.
Yeah.
I think
that's the most critical.
Well, I think it's the most critical because that's where we experienced the cultural disruption. It altered our memory of who we are, who we were, who we're supposed to be, and it also altered our cultural cues, our cultural signals, the cultural that we use to maintain our proper orientation, our correct orientation, our affirmative orientation. So I think that's where it was severed protractedly during the enslavement era. We were force-fed through violence and brutality, the European worldview. I mean, we didn't adopt it and embrace it.
To be uprooted.
Absolutely.
And I mean, the disorientation.
Absolutely.
Where is this?
Yeah,
You're
right.
out on a sea. Not that we had not been on the sea before, because I understand that we frequently came here and traded and spent time among the people who were the indigenous people who were here already. Sometimes we remained and married. Most times we went home because we liked our home. So we weren't baffled by the ocean. But why are we on this ocean, and where is this ship taking us?
Well, it was the trauma of the kidnapping.
Absolutely.
You see, it was the kidnapping. I mean, the forced displacement, the forced separation. I think, and I don't think we in psychology even have paradigms to relate to the level of trauma that our people actually underwent, through that experience. And so I think that we're still trying to develop the kind of constructs that we need to capture the psychological dilemma that our people experience in this traumatizing zone called the Ma'afa, or the enslavement experience. So I think we're still studying it. Just think about the fact that at the so-called emancipation, when you have wars and catastrophes, they call them triage. They bring the medical, the aid out to the people. They rush it out there and set up some emergency things.
Look at your vital signs.
Yeah, so we can, we can check these people out and bring them.
Begin a plan of treatment.
That was not done for our people. I mean, here we come. Not that they were capable of doing so, but it never happened. And these people coming out of this traumatizing experience, unparalleled in human history, and they're just told to go on and get on with your life as best you can.
Act like they never laid a glove
on
on you.
All of the trauma that we brought with, and I think that comes out in the post-traumatic slave disorders paradigm and the post-traumatic slave syndromes.
I want you to talk about that, because most people deny that there is a post-traumatic syndrome, but it's real.
Well, I think it's just like cultural misorientation. You see, it's reinforced by the institutions of society, and that's how you overlook it. The institutions say it's okay. They say you're okay.
Get over it.
They say you're okay. You're okay.
Get over it. It
Black people are
happened
supposed to struggle.
100
They're
years ago.
supposed to have
That was
problems. So they've given us an explanation for the you know, the turmoil that we continue to experience. And as long as we're getting consistent messages that this is normal, you people just gotta zip it up or tub it up or so on and so forth.
Quit whining.
Then what do we do? What are we gonna do? You know, and then religion give us, say you can go pie in the sky or you know, or pray over it and that kind of thing and whatever. So nobody answers, nobody looks at systematically addressing the issue of
I just want to take
the
issue
trauma
with
of
one part of that
enslavement.
because I do it all the time. I do it with Patricia Newton, do it with Hunter. There's nothing post about this slavery, so-called
agree.
slavery.
I agree.
You cannot
Absolutely.
act as though this trauma has ended. You know, this
Absolutely
whole
right.
idea
Yeah.
of the emancipation and now you're free and what are you complaining about? You know, there's nothing. Stop calling it post. Call it traumatic disorder and associate it with whatever you want to call it, enslavement,
Well, you
slavery.
can call it post-plantation.
What,
Yeah.
but don't let it, well, okay, you can call it post plantation
Yeah.
or post. Yeah, I don't like post because it severs
Divides
it
it.
from
Yeah.
the
It
current
suggests that
experience.
right, I
It
agree.
and
Yeah.
it suggests that
And
it ended. We must
Really.
not suggest.
And it really explains the current experience.
Right.
Right. There's no
So
there's
we-
no discontinuity
So
there.
let's don't
There
do
you go.
post.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
all I care about
Yeah.
is that we do
Yeah.
recognize. And when you think about, you know, the first time I went to Senegal, and we went to Gorée Island, and we stood there, and we listened to the lecture, and we looked out the door of no return, and they talked about how the women, as you pointed out, were brutally, sexually brutalized by the captors, and how they separated the children from the mothers, from the men, and the men could hear the women and children
Crying.
being sexually brutalized, and they could not do anything about it. And you could almost hear the screams. You could feel, you felt that, you felt in that environment, you felt it. You felt like you were there. You felt, you saw in your mind's eye, you saw the helplessness of our people who were pinned into those dark, concrete rooms, separated from each other. What must that have done to every single one of them, particularly the children, particularly the children, so that when there's no description
Absolutely.
for that. You
Right.
absolutely, you know, they tried, you know, I know that, you know, we got Ma'afa, you know, we got, but you can't sum that
Well,
up.
it's so unprecedented. We don't have a vocabulary for it yet.
No,
We're
it's
still struggling
beyond,
with it.
it's inexpressible.
Yeah.
That experience is inexpressible, and which is why I understand why you say it's the critical experience, because it is so far beyond anything that human beings have ever had to endure. And then to be dismissed as though, okay, that happened,
Get over
and as Bob is saying, get over it. You know, get on, have closure. You know, and get on with your life.
And I also call it critical because everything that happens to us now that you see, that's where it has its origin.
Kiara Cheatwood said there is not one thing that is happening to black people that cannot be traced directly back to that.
Precisely.
Not just you could make a link, but you can take it straight from here right back to the slave experience, including the plantation practice of separating the families, women from their children and so forth, and then bringing them back together and forcing them to cohabit with each other. I mean, what kind of lewd, perverted mind could you have that you would have a need to put a mother with her son and she didn't know her own child? He didn't know his own mother because they'd been separated. Why do you need to have these? Why do you need to put these kinds of shows on for your fellow plantation owners? Why is this entertainment for you? Haven't you done enough to these people?
And that's why the Bobby Wright paradigm is so instructive for African-centered psychology because he puts the spotlight on what is the psychology of this entity that we're confronted with here. That we must deal with this entity. We must deal with this kind of human psychology, distorted human psychology. We got to confront it.
It's demonic
So we
mind.
absolutely. So I think that was such a seminal work. I mean, it
has
because
never been surpassed.
because we're challenged now because it's very easy. They can lull us to sleep, with all these. These facades of humanism and all these other things that they throw at us, what Bobby used to call the red cape.
Right.
They throw all
The
this stuff at us,
the matador.
Yeah, and that kind of thing. And we chasing that stuff. And it has nothing to do with anything.
Nothing to do with anything.
And so I think that again, that's one of the stumbling blocks to African liberation is we must understand our enemy. And I think that there's no way around it. And we must understand our enemy in the most intellectual, rigorous fashion. This is not some emotive kind of stuff we're talking about here. We're talking about we must study this phenomena systematically because humanity hasn't seen anything like this.
Right, and,
you see.
and don't want to see it again.
Oh, absolutely.
Doctor, I thought about once, this was years ago, Bobby said, when asked why do African American kids shoot each other, and he said because we haven't been taught. We haven't taught them.
We
to shoot.
train to kill each other, never to kill other people.
So I wanted to ask Dr. Kambon, how do we confront this issue of the increasing urban violence amongst and between African Americans?
We're going to try to deal with some of this, brainstorm on some of that this weekend.
Right.
But I think that the cultural misorientation paradigm, it instructs us that if our children are engaging in crazy behavior, it has to be because we taught them. You alluded to that earlier. It has to be that we had them at birth, and they weren't these distorted figures at birth. You see, they had all the potential to become anything in the world, and somehow between that point and 14 or 9, in some cases, years of age, we got this little wild being here. And I'm saying something happened in that interim. Now, either the parents did it, or they were naive enough to entrust that precious soul to the enemies of African people and allowed them to do it.
And we were not good custodians of our children.
Absolutely. And we have to acknowledge that and correct, so we can correct it. It's not to browbeat ourselves, because we have to build ourselves up, but we must face who we are first, so that we can see what is it we're trying to restore. What is in that regard. So I've been invited to a couple of these child development conferences, but I don't get invited back too often because I challenge them to, first of all, hold a mirror up and let's look at what did we do.
I got you.
You see, what have we contributed
to
to the destruction of our own children? And as Dr. Francis Wilson told us years ago, without black children, there is no black future. You see?
Absolutely.
So that mother tells that child, if he hits you, you beat him. And that you're instilling in that child self-hatred and hatred toward his fellow African
or having
children.
a social policy that encourages a 14 or 12-year-old girl to have a child, and then she's got to go it on her own. And we expect somehow that a affirmative entity is going to result from that 15, 16 years later. And we're appalled and shocked that it's a destructive force. But what did we do? Right. What did we do to affirm it, to create, the kind of developmental space, African-centered developmental space, to create a little, warrior for African people, affirmative force for our liberation.
Oh Lord, this is
and
such a
building.
big topic.
So it's challenging. It's so challenging.
It really is.
I don't know where to go next. I got stuff here. Bobby used to say, the only contradiction is that there are no contradictions.
That's right.
Then you come along and say, to be an African in America is a contradiction. Talk about that.
Because in America is anti-African, is anti-black. They have a worldview system, a socio-cultural reality that is about the destruction of black people. So to call ourselves an African in America, and we're not at war with the American cultural reality, that that's a misnomer. I mean, that's a misnomer. That it has no reality. If you're an African American, you're an African in struggle, you know, with the American cultural reality.
Okay.
So you're not a part of. You're a victim of.
So you're saying African-American. If you're an African-American,
That's a
then
paradoxical state.
that's mutually exclusive. Those are mutually exclusive terms then.
Absolutely.
Okay. All right.
You're a victim.
Right.
You're a
Okay.
victim.
Okay.
So we're in America, but not of America.
Yeah. Okay.
Well, no matter how much we want to be, of course, misorientation again speaks that the only way America affirms black people, they affirm them as black-skinned white people.
There you go.
It's the only way we
You're
affirm.
saying that's an oxymoron.
Well, of course.
That you can't be those two things
Right.
simultaneously.
Because a community assumes family, a close connection.
Yeah.
We've never been accepted in that community, no matter what we
We
try
didn't-
and do.
But we got to accept the reality.
we have to accept the
country
reality
was
about
founded on being anti-black. I mean, that's how they conceived of it. We weren't included.
No.
So I mean, at the beginning, they were attacking the humanity of African people.
Is that a birth defect?
Yeah,
As
Dr.
Hunter said, Condoleezza said? You quoted Condoleezza.
Well, Bobby says it's as old as anything we know about him. So if it's not genetic, then it certainly operates like it is. You know, in that regard. So I don't know. You know, I doubt it. I really think we just have distinct adaptive responses. I adopt Baba Jake's idea about, you know, at the earliest stage of development, this what abnormal anxiety, this alienation,
Alienation.
this seeing
There you
yourself
go.
as different.
And
I think
seeing
and
everything
Barr and
else as
Francis is
other.
saying, yeah, so you couldn't handle being in this universe with all this color and all this other stuff and
Well, you know,
standing out, and it creates all these other kind of psychiatric
when I read The Iceman's
responses.
Inheritance, it just startled me when he said that at one, and then I found it in other literature, but that the male feared the female because he thought she was a different species because she had bore children and had a cycle. And I'm saying, you know, this is like saying your man thinks you're a goldfish. You know, I couldn't imagine what kind of mind can look at its counterpart and see it as alien, not just as different, but as alien. And the man, and then I found it in other literature. Works and Days, I think, was one of them. But there were other places where they talked about this estrangement of the male and the female because the male thought the female was something other than, you know, he didn't think she was his Eve. He didn't see himself as Adam and she as his Eve, being a part of him at all, but a part of something entirely strange and to be feared. So it goes without saying, if you can look at your female counterpart and see it as a different species, what do you think when you see something who is not only of a different gender, but who is also has a different attributes of every kind, different configuration, you know, the nose, the lips, the skin color, the hair texture, all of this stuff must scare you to death.
It's an anxiety-driven alienation that we just can't comprehend. I mean, it's difficult for African people to comprehend that.
But I think we should
because
be able
it's so
to.
polar opposite from
But
how
I think
African people.
you know why I think we should be able to? Because Africans are the oldest people on the planet, according to all the stuff. The
there's no doubt.
anthropologists, they went out and dug them up and said this. Now, when Africans saw the first Europeans, they were the ones who should have been scared out of their wits because everything had been black prior to then.
But they
had never ever seen a person that didn't have skin color, that had didn't have hair with texture.
Right.
They had never.
But their nature wasn't driven by fear and alienation.
That's exactly right.
Their nature was not driven by fear and alienation.
No, no.
Oh.
You see, so
were
they had a
accepting
different
people.
adaptive response
Right, they had
than the
adaptive-
Caucasians.
right,
They're
right,
different
right.
That's what I'm arguing in terms of worldview differences. They're different, different
Okay,
survival thrusts,
okay.
different
That's
adaptive
right.
responses.
Okay. Okay.
And I think that when we look at what kind of reality, what kind of civilization they constructed,
Okay.
those
You
they
call that a
reflect
civilization?
what I call what they call. What they can, of course, it's
That's
their
a-
version
that's a-
of it.
that's
Their
a
version.
civilization.
See, I don't think we have to make them.
You gotta have civil
See,
in there.
but I don't want to make them subhuman and all those things that we
I don't
do
wanna make anybody
emotionally.
sub-
I
I
want to
just
look
wanna
at them
know
as
if there's a
an entity
word.
that is different from us. They exist on the same human plane, but they're just different.
But
Right.
wait
They're
a minute
different.
now. Civilization got the word civil in it. You can't
Mm-hmm.
be at war with the rest of the whole world
But it's
and
their
be
version.
civil.
But it's their version of civilization. Civil to them means dominate.
Right.
You
And
see?
constant conflict.
see?
Constant conflict.
You see?
Okay.
See, I'm just saying their dictionary is different from ours.
Well, we're going to have
and
problems.
we can't make their dictionary
we
ours.
have problems because I'm not understanding that.
Right. Okay.
But I'm going to accept that because I really don't have any time to argue with you because I'm too busy trying to find out what else you know that I want you to tell people about.
Okay.
And, oh, you know what? One of the chapters in a book that you wrote had what I thought was an oxymoron. And the chapter's title was "The Capture and Initial Slave Marches." And what I wanted to contest is the use of capture and slave, because I think where you have capture, you got to have captives and captors. I don't like the word slave, as you can probably tell. And if you're going to say these people were captured, they didn't capture slaves. They captured free people. These people were not, they were in there, we were in Africa, on our own land, minding our own business, moving around as free human beings. When we were captured, we were captives, not slaves.
I would suspect that what I'm saying there, that is that once they were captured, their status became slaves.
No, they were still
So
captives.
Well, I'm saying that's your choice of words versus mine. I'm saying that's what I was trying to say. Once they were captured, then their status within Eurocentric reality was slaves.
Okay, then I want you
see.
to put a footnote on that.
Okay.
Because in the very end,
But
probably in the,
I understand what you're
and
saying.
I know you
Their
do,
status,
which is why we can have
Right.
why I can say that to you and know that I'm not offending you. Because in the very next sentence, you said something about the captors brutalizing, sexually brutalizing the women. So I knew that you had a full, complete understanding of the fact that these are captives, these were captors. What had happened was a capture, not not some people that went and got some slaves from a slave market. No, these were captives who were kidnapped
Enslaved.
and then put through a process which you call enslavement, and I agree. I agree with that. The process of enslavement means to transform a captive
Into
who has a will of his own, understands that he's a captive, which is why he runs away, which is why he mutinies, which is why he resists and fights back, because he knows he's being held against his will. But the process, the seasoning process.
well, there are subtle connotations in how we use terms and that, and so on. And those things are open to interrogation.
But that is an enslavement process. What you're quite right. That's an enslavement process. But understand that these are captives who are being enslaved, and let us not ever lose, because it gives our children this idea that we were all, we were these slaves that they brought out of Africa, and somehow some people think we're better off because, you know, we brought out Africa as slaves, and now we've been emancipated and everything.
Or at worst, that we were savages who were uncivilized.
Right, right.
And that America gave us the freedom of civilization.
Right.
And
Yeah,
learning.
but there's a continuity in the book because we talk about ancient Kemet, we talk about
Right,
early
right,
civilizations.
right.
prior
I'm
to
not,
that,
I'm
so
not
it's
at all
not
at
a-
odds
yeah,
with you. I
in terms of that, so.
love your work. And I'm very happy that you're here and that I will be able to see you speak uninterruptedly, because I can't stand up and ask questions every 5 minutes.
But we just have an intellectual, you know.
we having this
disagreement on
exchange
that
because
one. That's
it's
no
my
problem.
opportunity,
Yeah,
and
I
I'm
agree.
so happy you're here. I'm gonna let you make the closing statements because we got 3 minutes. I'm giving all to you.
I think that the solution to our problem is going to require unprecedented work toward constructing an African-centered cultural space where we can think and contemplate and interrogate,
And
and create the kind of institutional structures that will allow us to rebuild an African world order for African people on planet Earth. I think that ultimately that's what we're aiming for. That's the corrective of our current circumstance. We must regain our place in the world, and we must protect that place for African people all over the world, starting in Africa, and all over the world. And that obviously is going to mean some kind of reorganization even in Africa if we're going to protect ourselves. But the only way we'll do that, we must know our enemy. We must know our enemy, and a part of our scholarship must focus on dissecting, interrogating what is this enemy, what is the nature of this enemy that we're dealing with. And I think that's very critical for any African liberation movement.
So, Robert, what's the talk about tomorrow?
Well, tomorrow, obviously, Dr. Kambon is going to talk about his book and the impact his book has
Books.
made on
They're gonna be-
books
yeah.
on
be more than one
black
I'll be referring to.
psychology.
You're going to have
right?
some books there.
And we'll
Yes.
have some books there
Yeah.
to sell.
Yes.
And we'll have a question and answer period. So if you come, you'll be able to ask some more questions.
Okay, it says that you're going to discuss African American behavior in the 21st century community or violent chaos and why. I like the why part because that means you're going to explain to us the reasons.
We're going to
for
interrogate these African-centered constructs that we've been
Alright.
generating in African-centered psychology and
Okay,
see how they apply to alter our condition.
all right.
to
And you're going to
women
smile
empowerment.
all the time while you're doing it.
It's
You're doing
hey,
this real serious work, and every time I've seen your face, you've been smiling.
Well, it's
you
an
know.
optimism. We believe in our people, we love our people, and we're gonna win. As Bobby said, we're gonna win.
Right,
We're gonna
right.
win. It's gonna be a hard struggle, but as long as we're breathing, we're gonna be moving this.
Bobby always said a
Forward.
luta
Yeah.
continua.
Right. And
struggle
Dr.
continues.
Peace, we're African people whether we want to admit it or not. That's the
And on
reality.
that note, I will say